In all conflicts there are iconic cities in which for some reason the fighting is grouped around them. Generally, this occurs in places that are strategically more important than others because of their location, or because of the resources or institutions that exist in them. This was the case of the city of Kharkov, in which up to 4 battles took place in World War II, and which today remains one of the main conflict zones in the current dispute between Russia and Ukraine. Although at first glance it seems that Kharkov is just another city, without anything special, as we will see below, it is not like that at all. When on June 22, 1941 the Germans attacked the Soviet Union, Kharkov was about 1,000 kilometers from the German starting points, and at first, there was nothing to think that they could get there. As we know, Stalin had a powerful army that was numerically superior to the German one. After the first weeks of the campaign, the German armies defeated the vast majority of Soviet units that were on the border and were advancing at a fairly high rate. In less than a month, the German vanguards of the Southern Army Group reached the suburbs of Kiev, although the battle for the city would take place a month later. Instead, the Germans continued to advance south towards the Dnieper River basin. Their goal was to get there as quickly as possible to prevent the Soviets from establishing a strong defensive position on its shore. Finally, the German army managed to pocket more than 660,000 Red Army soldiers in the city of Kiev, and captured abundant material by the end of September. With this, all previous defenses to the city of Kharkov had fallen, and now the city was directly in front of the Germans. So let us now see the importance of this city. In the first place, Kharkov was the second most populous city in Ukraine, since in 1941 it had more than 1 million inhabitants. Also, in general calculations, it was the 4th or 5th most important city in the Soviet Union. At a strategic level, it was also a very important city, since practically all the railways in the southwest of the Soviet Union passed through it, connecting the Crimea, the Donbass, the Dnieper basin and the Caucasus. Although this occurred with respect to land transport connections, the same also occurred with air connections. On the other hand, in Kharkov was one of the largest industrial centers of the Soviet Union. One of his greatest contributions was the T-34 tank, which was designed and developed at the Kharkov tractor factory. This was considered the most powerful tank plant in the country. Other factories that were located in the city included the aircraft plant, the NKVD plant and the turbine plant. Finally, and this fact being the least known, in the city of Kharkov was one of the most important Soviet research centers in the entire country, in charge of the development of the atomic project of the Soviet Union. Its name was the Kharkov Physico-Technical Institute of Ukraine, which together with Moscow and Leningrad, were developing the atomic bomb. All these elements make Kharkov a particularly important city, and also make it a symbol for the whole country, so preserving it is a strong element for the morale of the population. Having this clear, the first battle for Kharkov occurred during the last phase of the Great Generalized German Offensive throughout the Eastern Front of 1941. Specifically, it was on October 24 when the city fell into German hands after brief fighting. Even so, the Wehrmacht captured more than 100,000 Red Army soldiers. With regard to the numerous factories that were in Kharkov, we have to point out that most of them were dismantled and transported at full speed, and when the Germans arrived there was nothing left of them. In any case, there was a lull in Soviet production, until later they would be assembled east of the Urals. After taking Kharkov, the Germans continued to advance into the Soviet Union, although they did so in the Moscow area and Rostov, not advancing much further east of Kharkov. Later in December they were stopped and the Soviets counterattacked. With the situation like this, Kharkov was right on the front line. For 1942 the Germans planned a second offensive on the Soviet Union, this time with the aim of seizing the oil from the Caucasus. However, just before the German army attacked, the Soviets got ahead and thus began the Second Battle of Kharkov. This time they took advantage of a ledge south of Kharkov to launch a pincer attack on the city from the northeast and south. Although this offensive that began on May 12, 1942, took the Germans completely by surprise, they were quickly able to organize themselves and turn the situation around. Basically, what they did was cut off the Soviet salient from the south, thereby leaving the Soviet vanguard that had entered their territory isolated. It all ended in just a few days with a strong defeat of the Red Army, which had not yet perfected the famous operational art, which months later it would develop effectively. Although the so-called Second Battle of Kharkov ended on May 28, a month later, specifically on June 28, the Germans would once again launch a large-scale attack on the Soviet southern flank. This new German campaign would end for them in the worst possible way with the defeat at Stalingrad, and the subsequent Soviet offensives over the entire sector, which would lead them to retreat hundreds of kilometers until by February 1943, Kharkov was recovered by the Red Army. This is how the Third Battle of Kharkov began. The main characteristic of this battle was that it featured two elite German divisions, these being the Das Reich and the Leibstandarte, which despite their status and fame, could not do anything to defend the city. At the same time, Manstein was able to reorganize a number of units that had retreated across the German southern front, and managed to launch a counteroffensive that cut off the Soviet vanguards. Later they continued to advance north until by mid-March 1943 they recaptured Kharkov. If you want to see this battle in great detail, I leave you in the description a program that we recently uploaded in which we analyze in depth all the operations of this Third Battle of Kharkov. In any case, this was the occasion in which the Germans conquered this city for the second time. From this point on there was quiet on the Eastern Front as the next major summer offensive, known as Operation Citadel, was being prepared. This German attack was launched just a few kilometers north of Kharkov, although at first the city did not play any important role. After the German failure to sever the Kursk salient, the Soviets counterattacked again in many sectors, giving rise to the Kutuzov, Myzdonets, and Rymyantseve offensives. In any case, the offensive that interests us was Rymyantseve's, in which the Soviets fell on Kharkov again, beginning the fourth and final battle for the city. This confrontation took place in August 1943, and managed to recover the territory that the Germans had conquered a month before in the Kursk salient, to later continue advancing without pause until they recovered Belgorod and Kharkov. At that time the German army was totally overwhelmed by the situation, and did nothing more than send its armored units to one point or another of the front, to see how the Soviets attacked from another place. Even so, and despite everything, the Red Army paid a high price for expelling the Germans, and it is estimated that in this offensive they had between 200 and 250,000 casualties, while the Germans lost about 25,000 men. From the end of August the fighting moved further and further away from Kharkov, and the new front line was fixed on the banks of the Dnieper River in September. This was therefore the last time that armed combat took place in the city, which gradually returned to normal while the Red Army approached Berlin. It has been again in this year of 2022 when the fighting has once again reached the gates of Kharkov. Well, I hope that with this program you have understood the role of Kharkov during the Second World War, which, as you have just seen, was so important, since it was one of the places where there was more fighting during the entire conflict. I consider that the most important battle and that deserves to be studied carefully is the Third Battle of Kharkov, in that famous Manstein counteroffensive, which I leave you in the description. In any case, we say goodbye here. Thank you all, especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you in the next one. See you soon.